Well, after finishing fifth in the Central Division last year with 96 points, the St. Louis Blues will be looking to rise in the divisional standings in 2025-26 in arguably the toughest division in the NHL. So, who are they up against? How high can the Blues finish this season? We're going to take a look at where each of the Blues divisional rivals stand entering the season, break down their offseason moves, who joined the team, who left, and then project the standings for the Central Division for 2025-26. All that and more coming today on Note News. Welcome into another episode of Note News. It's John and Alec back with you as always. And today we are sort of shifting pretty firmly into 2025-26 season preview coverage. A lot of what we've done has been some off-season reaction. What we've done a lot lately has been some more like fun conceptual type stuff, sort of analyzing different player groups and buying and selling is what we did last year, or last episode, pardon me. Which players are we buying and selling on? But today we're going to be pretty firmly in preview territory, looking at the upcoming season, in particular looking at each of the Blues Central Division rivals, as I said. And as we ramp up to the start of the NHL season, which is coming up pretty quickly here, Alec, we're going to continue to provide some great coverage, previewing the season, then of course covering the season once we get into it. So we hope you'll stick with us through all of that and join live when you can, and sort of listening or watching after the fact when you can. So the best way to follow along with us and interact with us is to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, like this video, follow, rate, review on Spotify and Apple, and then follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Note News Pod. We post when we're going live, so you never have to miss an episode. Alec, let's just sort of jump right in because we got a lot to talk about. But before we talk Central Division stuff, I want to give you a minute to talk about your boy. News came today that the Blues have signed Nathan Walker to an extension. I believe the number was 2 years and
887,000 and a half.
Okay, yeah, AAV. So that would be like just under 2 million total. Or wait, I don't know. Anyways, how are you feeling about the contract extension? I know you posted today that it was a little unexpected for you, but then also Justin Carbonneau signed his entry-level contract, his two-way in 3 years, I believe, entry-level contract. So how are you feeling about both these signings? Mostly Nathan Walker, since I know that's your boy.
Yeah, I think this has some ramifications that I'm interested to see play out, but I'm personally very happy with the decision they chose, which was to go with Nathan Walker. So that does lock up a spot, you would think, on the fourth line, just given the calculus of how many players they have to, or how many players they have to fill so many spots on the roster. You'd think Nathan Walker is the guy they're going to be sticking with now as someone who's signed beyond this season. So he's signed for 2 more years. Notable players who will be free agents after this season are Torpchenko, Oscar Sundquist, Matthew Joseph, all going to be UFAs. Milan Lucic as well, if he even makes the team, that's still yet to be seen. So they're going with Walker on the fourth line. I love it. I think this is exactly what Army was saying of continuing that identity line. They lost a guy like Faxa, yes, but Nathan Walker offered just as much, if not more, to that fourth line as as any of the three, I should say, of that WTF line. And as the franchise leader in single season leader in hits too, is going to be able to establish dominating ice play for when he does make it in his sheltered minutes. Is absolutely going to lock down on the ice and just make this team suck to play against. And that's the identity they want to go with. And it's so much fun to see them continuing with that. I'm curious to see who gets the remaining 2 spots on the roster on the fourth line, that is, in regular starts. But this would lead me to thinking that Nathan Walker is one of those guys. There is a chance that maybe this is just a backup signing, that he's going to be the 13th forward on the roster, given the term, or given the value of the contract. And that wouldn't be a terrible deal, only making under $1 million annually. there is a chance that Walker's going to be the 13th guy, the injury replacement call up. But I think this means that Walker's going to get a spot regularly on the fourth line. And I'm so excited to keep watching him play. Watch this scrappy 5'9" underdog just show up these, 6 foot something behemoths and topple them with relative ease. It's such a fun style of hockey to watch. I love Nathan Walker, and I can't wait. He is now officially a Blues legend.
He really is. I think what makes him so valuable is that he'll just go out there and leave it all on the ice for his team, no matter who they are, right? And he's a team first guy all the way. He's scrappy. He's hard to play against, like you said, and that's the kind of guy you wanna keep on your team rather than play against. So I don't hate the move. Like you said, I was sort of surprised, at least to see it so far in advance, but excited to see him continue to wear the Blues sweater. I would be surprised. This is a conversation for another time. I'd be surprised if Torpchenko didn't earn another one of those spots. We can probably talk about this later on, but yeah, I think there is an interesting conversation to be had about how the rest of the bottom six shakes out with some other names coming off the books, as you said, in the next couple of years. Justin Carbonneau signed to an ELC as well. That's exciting news. We should really get into that maybe on our next prospect devoted episode, but hoping we can see that guy in St. Louis sooner rather than later. But of course, would want that to be at the right time for his development. Let's go ahead and shift into Central Division talk. So we're going to do our best to try and get through all 7 of the Blues divisional rivals today. So we're going to have to try to work a little quickly, but we really want to get this knocked out in one conversation here. And I think the way we should do this is go from bottom of last year's standings to the top and just sort of work our way through each of the Blues Central Division rivals. And Alec, what question do you think we should be trying to answer for each of these teams, or what set of questions should we be trying to answer, as we go team by team?
Well, I think it's how do they match up against the Blues, as we are a St. Louis Blues podcast. Is the biggest thing is how are these individual matchups, and then what do they mean on the season for the Blues? What does a game against Chicago in the middle of the season mean versus against a team like Winnipeg?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then I think just sort of in the spirit of like a preview type episode, just sort of projecting a little bit about where these teams are going to finish, how good they're going to be, that kind of stuff, which I think is sort of obvious, maybe not needed to be said, but I think that's something that we should do as well. I think at the end we will just sort of list each of our projected divisional standings, so we don't really have to do it as we go. We can save that for the very end. But why don't we go team by team here, starting at the bottom of last year's standings. As I said, finished 8th in the division with 61 points were the Chicago Blackhawks. They were one of the quote unquote most improved teams last offseason, just by virtue of being pretty poor the year before and signing a lot of pieces around the fringes last year. This offseason, there was a little bit less. So in terms of their offseason, we're going to do sort of like in and out for each team. So coming in to Chicago, they've got Andrei Burakovsky and Sam Lafferty. Leaving Chicago are Philip Kurashev, Pat Maroon, Alec Martinez, and TJ Brody. They had a lot of cap space freed up this summer. I think a lot of people had them as the type of team that, the type of team down the standings to keep an eye on, just as far as ability to try and make up some ground, to try and, improve just by virtue of how much money they had to spend. But I was a little bit surprised to see them not do very much. So, I mean, I remember one rumor that maybe they could sign Marner. That I never really thought that would happen, but that was out there. To be fair, they've got a promising prospect pool, right? Some exciting young players. It seems like they're counting a lot on those guys to take steps rather than trying to give those guys some help in the form of veterans or established players. So, Alec, what do you make of their offseason? Were you surprised by what little they did? And how are you feeling about them coming into 25, 26?
I'm not surprised by it. It's kind of the Blackhawks' MO to just wait and let the internal development come for the um, time that they have played under their new GM. Is that they make moves on the margins, they sell cheap, and losing players like Pat Maroon, Alec Martinez, even Khrushchev to an extent are kind of identity players. So they're kind of just a aimless team right now, sort of wandering through mediocrity to really just poor hockey on the ice. And there's not a lot. They're pretty much entirely leaning on the internal development their of their uh, excuse me, they're entirely leaning on the internal development of their young players to get anywhere, namely Connor Bedard and Frank Nazar. I mean, I will say the addition of Burakovsky isn't a nothing addition. He's a nice player, but for him to be a top liner is a pretty rough look. But they're still don't really have an identity as a team, and which is the biggest reason why they just don't really scare me as a team and should finish towards the bottom of the Central.
Yeah, I agree. I think Nazar doesn't look too bad. As I said, the rest of the prospect pool, there's some promise there. Drafted Levshinov last year. They've got Anton Frendel, some other names in the system as well. Um, but what concerns me about Chicago, and I should say as a Blues fan, I'm not really concerned about this, but just in terms of the ceiling for this team for the upcoming season and beyond, it really feels like it's what Bedard can do as sort of their franchise player. He's kind of the cornerstone of their rebuild. Um, and I think he was a little underwhelming last year. And it's difficult for anyone to live up to sort of the superlatives and expectations that he had as the best player since Connor McDavid or Sidney Crosby or whoever. It's tough to live up to that. And I think for better for worse, at least early in both of their careers, he and Macklin Celebrini are going to be compared constantly. And I think it sort of would be tough for Bedard to live up to what Celebrini is able to do. Celebrini sort of established himself last year as a pretty solid two-way player who can generate some solid hockey for his team by himself. It feels like Bedard has a harder time with that. I don't think he can sort of do it all by himself like Celebrini can. Defensively, not so great. Offensively, he's a fantastic player. But I think he feels like he needs a little bit more assistance than a guy like Celebrini does. So, what are your thoughts on Bedard? Like, is the ceiling for him lower than maybe we thought? You know, do you expect him to have a good year to get a little bit better? Yeah, just like Bedard thoughts, because there's not much else, at least this year, to talk about when it comes to Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's not much else to talk about. Nazar's a nice player, signed a nice extension, but you know, with Bedard, I am waiting one more year before I really start to say that he's not the player we thought he was, just because he is still 20 years old. There's still a lot of development that could come, but it's definitely coming a lot slower than everybody thought. This will be now his third year, I believe, in the NHL. Yeah. And last season had 23 goals and 67 points. I think the biggest thing for him is that goals total is just not what we thought it was going to be. As one of the best wrist shots, if not maybe the best wrist shot in the entire game, it's up there at least. He's just not really weaponizing it, and it seems like he's losing his confidence in Chicago, and that's where I kind of worry about him as a player. I think the tools are still there for him, but will he achieve his upside in Chicago? I think they're really hurting his development, and that's the
Yeah.
biggest story I have with Bedard. Is it's less a Bedard problem and more of a Blackhawks problem, that they are kind of stunting his growth and not allowing him to be the player he can be by just not doing a rebuild at all.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I don't have a ton to add there. I just think it is an interesting thing to watch, both for this upcoming season and long term, especially for such a young guy with such high expectations. Why don't we move next? Move up up last year's standings one spot to seventh in the Central Division. The Nashville Predators finished with 68 points. They were the talk of the league this time last year after the big year that or the big summer that they had, signing some pretty big free agents. But when it comes to the that those additions translating into performance, it didn't look so good. It was a rough year for them last year. So this offseason, coming into Nashville, Eric Holla, Nicholas Hague, and Nick Perbix leaving Chicago or Nashville. Sorry, Colton Sissons and Jeremy Lawson. So I don't personally have a lot to talk about when it comes to Nashville. I think sure there are pieces there to like. Philip Forsberg is great. He's a great player. Yusei Saros, solid goalie. Roman Yossi, I think, is probably due for a better season. And then it's difficult to speak ill of Ryan O'Reilly, obviously. But I think otherwise there's not a lot that gets me excited. I was sort of surprised at how bad a year, Marchessault and Stamkos had. Maybe you could say that there should be more in the tank for those guys, but they're both 35. So some regression is coming long term for those guys. Maybe it started last year, but maybe it was just a new team thing. So really, for me, the issue with Nashville is down the middle. I don't like their center depth very much. Like I said, there are pieces to like. You can sort of see it a little bit more with a team like Nashville than you can with Chicago, obviously, just because they've got some established players who probably should be playing better than they did last year. But what's your take on Nashville? Obviously, not a big offseason, but kept the big names that they signed a year before. What do you? I mean, they're a difficult projection, I think, for a lot of reasons. But what do you think of Nashville?
I think you kind of touched on it there in the end, but I actually have a lot of concerns with Nashville, and I actually have more concerns with Nashville than I do Chicago. I think Chicago
Hmm.
has enough pockets of upside with their defense, with their center core, to where they can luck into some games. I actually have Nashville as the eighth team in the division currently. I think
Whoa.
the star talent is better on Nashville with guys like Forsberg and Yossi. But outside of that, I mean, it is a thin roster. As you said, Marchessault and Stamkos are going to be 34 and 35, respectively. Even Philip Forsberg is going to be 31, 32. Ryan O'Reilly is going to be 34. This is an aging roster, and their young players are nothing to get excited about for those who are tapped into the prospect world. Like their prospect pool is okay depth, but they're not NHL ready, and the guys they have at the NHL level are just cannot hang if what we saw last year is to be believed. And I think they're a much easier team to exploit on the ice itself, given if you think about how, if winning a hockey game is winning your ice minutes, Nashville is going to have maybe 10 to 15 minutes a night where they have at best slightly better than you play at, on average, probably comparable play when their first line is on the ice and when their first pair is on the ice. And but that's only going to line up for a few shifts each period. They're going to really have to drive these old players into the ground if they want to have any chance of winning hockey games, and that is a recipe for disaster in terms of injuries and in terms of how just a hockey season, the grind of a hockey season goes. So I actually have a lot more questions about Nashville, and I have them as the eighth team in the division. I think they're the worst roster on paper, and I am selfishly, because this team seemed to be the thorn in the blue side forever. I am so here for the Nashville Predators downfall, but Yeah, I think there's not a lot of things to be scared of because even when Forsberg and O'Reilly and Yossi are on the ice, if you can just play even hockey with them, which shouldn't be hard for a bunch of 32 plus year olds, then your depth can easily, in terms of the Blues, can easily beat theirs, and that's an easy recipe to wins for the Blues.
Yeah, I think you touched on it there. The Blues forward group is a group that I really like for a lot of reasons, and I just don't feel the same way about Nashville's. I think they have in Philip Forsberg maybe a better player than the Blues have. You could sort of argue about him or Robert Thomas, but yeah, I think it wouldn't be tough to outperform these guys. And then just because I forgot to do it while we were talking about Chicago, I also want to talk about when the Blues are playing each of these teams.
Mm.
And so just to cover Chicago first, they will be playing Chicago 4 times this season. First on Wednesday, October 15th in St. Louis. Then on Friday, December 12th, also in St. Louis. Then Wednesday, January 7th in Chicago. And then Saturday, April 11th, also in Chicago. That's the fourth to last game of the season. So spread
4
out a few
games.
bit.
Wow.
Sorry.
Oh, just 4 games. Usually it's 3.
Yeah,
That's
four
nice.
games this year. So hopefully the Blues can feed off of that a little bit. So kind of spread out throughout the season. And then in terms of their games with Nashville, looks like they will be playing them uh, Thursday, December 11th in Nashville, Monday, December 15th in St. Louis, Saturday, December 27th in St. Louis, and Monday, February 2nd in Nashville. So another 4 games against Nashville. So kind of nice to have 8 games against those 2 teams for the Blues to sort of feed off hopefully some poor performing teams. So yeah, those are the matchups.
All
Well, why
right.
don't we move right along to some of the more interesting teams? Next up, we've got the Utah Mammoth, who finished 6th in the Central last year with 89 points. Obviously, I mean, I think it was a big step in the right direction last year for Utah after some poor seasons. They were in the wild card race late in the season. I think they fell out of it by the end, obviously, but they were in it for a good long while. They were sort of the fourth team to mention in that race and had a shot for sure. Um, but this year, I think, is one of the more interesting teams. Their offseason was they grabbed one of the bigger names moved this year in JJ Paterka, acquired him in a trade. They also coming into Utah they've got Brandon Tanev and Nate Schmidt leaving, Matthias Michelli, Josh Doan, Nick Bukestad, of course, and then Mike Kesselring. Um, I saw over on The Athletic that they sort of said that this offseason was like a net loss because they sacrificed a lot of depth. And Paterka might be like the best player in the trade, but did they sacrifice depth to get the guy? I don't know how much I buy into that. Utah, I think, is sort of a dark horse playoff team for a lot of people, and for good reason. They've got some really solid young players. Logan Cooley, Dylan Gunther, Clayton Keller. There's a lot to be excited about with that group. And then, defensively, Mikhail Sergachev was a big ad for them last offseason as well. So again, they have added to their top young talent by getting JJ Paterka. They had to give up some stuff to get it. Maybe they did sacrifice some depth, but they've also got a solid pipeline that they can sort of supplement that depth with. I am personally like thinking they will continue to take some steps this year, especially those 3 players I mentioned, Cooley, Gunther, and Keller. Um, they can really take this team to some new heights. So that's what I see in Utah. I think exciting young team that is poised to take some steps and maybe get a wild card spot. What do you think?
Yeah, Utah is a sneakily very fun team. Shout out Rob in the chat saying they're sleeper for fourth in their division. I think fourth is probably what they're eyeing, but they could reach even higher in my opinion. They're a pretty good hockey team, I think. I do agree that they sacrificed some of their depth, but I think they kind of needed to because they were just full of like third liners on every line. And now they actually have some real scoring talent in JJ Peterka, who's only 23 years old and still at a 30 goal season. So that should be a real offensive threat. And then Clayton Keller had 90 points last year. That can be a real first line that can play. Plus,
Hmm.
I think some of their depth is not bad at all. Like you said, Sergachev, one of the better offensive defensemen in the league. Nick Schmaltz is all right. They've got some names. I do think their bottom six is really thin. So I do
Yeah.
think that's where you can sort of beat them if you're the Blues is look to exploiting their weakness, which is their depth. If you can play with their top line forwards, which we showed that we sure could in that last game of the season, especially, um, you can definitely beat this Utah team, but they're definitely going to win some games scoring a lot more goals than people might expect. I think Utah is a big sleeper team. Definitely going to be a fun team to watch. I think they should be a very good offense. And I think defensively is where you can kind of beat them. But I think Utah kind of knows that and they see the league skewing more offensively and they're just trying to catch up here. Then again, they do have guys like Brandon Tanev, who's a defensive guy, but for the most part, I think they're an offensively minded team, and that can always be a scary recipe. Just look at Montreal. I mean, pretty much one using only offense and sacrificing all defense, and it got them into the playoffs and in a playoff series. So I think Utah is going to be a fun team to watch. I think they have some pockets of upside, but I think for the most part we know who they are. And I think they're going to be vying for that wild card, first or second wild card spot. So they, depending on how the Blues season goes, could definitely be a important competition to watch in terms of the games we're going to be playing against Utah this season.
Yeah, for sure. Which those games are. Can go ahead and do that. I think they're playing them 4 times as well. Believe it or not, starting in October 23rd in St. Louis, November 29th in St. Louis, January 9th in Utah, and last game of the season, April 16th in Utah. So,
Again,
you know, that could have some playoff implications there if both teams are sort of hanging around or in the playoff race. It could decide some divisional standings, which would be a lot of pressure, but also kind of exciting. I think you made a great point. They've got that game plan of offense first. It feels like, and for what it's worth, they are built to do that for sure. And it sort of feels like they are leaning into that. And then, as I said, I feel like the prospect pool is solid enough to sort of um, build around the edges where they have to. And then, as Peter said in the chat, the goaltending isn't bad either. They've got
yeah,
Vamelka who started 55 games last year, had a 904 save percentage, and then Connor Ingram is their backup. He had an 882 save percentage. Didn't have as good a year, but not a bad tandem there in Utah. So I think, as I said, they are a prime candidate to take some steps here of the crop of teams that missed the playoffs last year. I think they they might have the best chance out of all of them to make them this year. Um, all right, moving up. Of course, finishing at the next spot up in the Central Division was the St. Louis Blues at 96 points. They finished fifth in the Central. We're not going to talk about them today. We're just talking about some of the other teams. We are
we
a
have
Blues
4 other
podcast.
episodes if you're interested in that team.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we're gonna move it right along up to the fourth team from last year, the Minnesota Wild, who only finished 1 point ahead of the Blues, 97. Fourth in the Central. They got off to a pretty hot start last season, or decently hot, I would say. But cooled off a little bit, and you know, I think flirted with missing the playoffs at times down the stretch, but ultimately got it done. And lost in the first round to the Vegas Golden Knights. Um, so the story of their offseason, I feel like, is they have finally gotten some big money off the books. They had a lot of cap space, and we've sort of been talking for a while. Once they get that cap space, there are some moves coming. Um, we haven't really seen much of that yet, and I think there's a good reason for that, which we'll get to in a second. But just in terms of what they did this offseason, they brought in Nico Sturm and Vladimir Tarasenko, the man himself, which will be very weird to see Tarasenko in Minnesota. They lost Gustav Nyquist, Frederick Gaudreau, and Declan Chisholm. They signed Marco Rossi, to a bridge contract. Excuse me, but the big story which has sort of emerged lately, I think within the last week or so, of Minnesota's offseason is they are trying to sign their franchise cornerstone player, Kirill Kaprizov, to a huge extension. I believe the number was 8 years and 16 million AAV. Do I have that right?
Yep.
That was the offer
Which
that was reportedly on the table, and Kaprizov and his camp turned it down. I think
would
surprised a
have
lot
made
of
him the
people
highest paid player ever.
in history. Both is it both by AAV and like and
Yep.
total? Yeah, I think the current biggest contract is Draisaitl at 14 million. So yeah, would have topped that. So I've been listening. I've been listening to some hockey podcasts, and they've been talking about this for a while. One of which is 32 Thoughts with Elliot Friedman and Kyle Bukauskas, and they were saying uh, Friedge was sort of talking about how there are sort of two reasons why he could have turned this down. First is he wants more money, and if that's the case, maybe another team will offer him that money, or maybe Minnesota will come back and offer him that money. Um, but the way Minnesota was talking about it, during the season, they kind of set themselves up for this. They were like, "We will pay him so much money. We'll pay him whatever he wants." It's like basically what they said. They were like, "We will make him the highest player, the highest paid player in history, or in the history of our team, in the league, whatever." And they kind of set expectations really high, sort of saying we will outbid any other team for him if it comes to that. And it feels like, why wouldn't Kaprizov call their bluff and turn down their first offer and try to get some more money out of it? So maybe he just wants more money, but maybe he doesn't want to play in Minnesota anymore. I would be surprised if it was that one. I would be surprised if an extension didn't get done, to be honest. But if he doesn't want to play in Minnesota, and if that becomes clear at any point throughout the season or before the season, they're gonna have to trade him, right? Like it has to happen. If they know they're not gonna be able to keep him around, they just have to get some value back. So if it's that option and they trade him, obviously things look pretty bad for Minnesota. The other question around Kaprizov, as Matt pointed out in the chat, he has some injury risk and some health issues at times. So if he can stay healthy, that's a big question, whether or not he can do that. So there are some other things to be excited about for Minnesota. Boldy, Rossi, Zeev Boyum is coming as well. Maybe he can carve out a decent role on the team. Brock Faber is another one that's a great young player, but none of them can do more for Minnesota than Kaprizov can, and it feels like they can only. I mean, in the same way that we talked about it with Chicago and Bedard, Minnesota probably can really only get as far as Kaprizov can take them. I just don't see a lot else on that roster that can do that. So I've sort of thrown out a lot of stuff there, but what are your thoughts on Minnesota's offseason, on the Kaprizov conversation, and what things look like for them coming up? They got second wild card spot last year. Do you think they're sticking around that, improving, or getting worse? What are your thoughts?
Minnesota and Kaprizov are so intertwined because they have to be. Because Minnesota is kind of like what we talked about with Utah. They're kind of like the anti-Utah Mammoth, to where they value defense above everything else. I know he just left, but Freddie Goudreau was a guy who was a big defensive player. Joel Eriksson Ek has been in Selke contention for some time now. Um, and they've always valued defense, and also are maybe sneakily, maybe not so sneakily, building like the best defensive core in the NHL when guys like Buum are ready to play. With Faber, with Spurgeon, I mean that their defense is really really good, but they kind of have leaned too far into defense, in my opinion, in a very offensive league, to where they need a guy like Kaprizov to be this dynamic, just offensive weapon, because they don't have much else. They've put invested so much into their defense, and that's where, hopefully a guy like Vladimir Tarasenko can step in. But right now, Daily Faceoff has Tarasenko listed as their second line winger. If Vladimir Tarasenko is a second liner for you, I just have my questions about you as a playoff team. And at this point in his career, and it sucks to say, he's, maybe a Blues Mount Rushmore guy, but the fact is that when he was on his way out in St. Louis, he was already on the downturn in his career. It's now been 3 years since then, and I think, what is it, like three or four other NHL teams have all found that Tarasenko just isn't the player he used to be, and I think Minnesota's about to learn the hard truth there too. Despite him being a second liner. So I'm kind of spoiling what I think before I say it, but I have Minnesota on the outside looking into the playoff picture. I think Kaprizov, as pretty much everyone has brought up in the chat, is an injury prone guy. If he's not playing the full season for you, then your offensive threats are Marco Rossi, who's a playmaker but not a goal scorer, and Matt Boldy, who is a good young player. And then you're relying on like Brock Faber to score your goals. So I just don't think in an offensive league, I don't think their defense can be enough to keep them afloat without Kaprizov. And if Kaprizov is going to be, how I see it, I have no idea if this is the case, but how I see it, if he's going to be a little bit of a diva about the contract discussions and such, then I don't think that there's going to be trust in that locker room, and that only puts a dark cloud or sours things further. So I have a lot of questions with Minnesota that I think I see them missing the playoffs this year, and I see a team like Utah is up on the rise, potentially swapping and taking out their spot, because Kaprizov, to me, the reason I say he's kind of a diva about the situation is I just don't understand how you turn down that contract. I mean, what would a player not want if not to be the highest paid player in the NHL? He's not getting more than that. I would be shocked if any team offers him more than 16 million a year, as he is an injury prone player. Yes, he's one of the best on the ice when he plays, but he doesn't play all 82 games or even close to it, and that's just part of his narrative for his entire career. I am I'm honestly lost by the Kaprizov situation. I don't have any guesses as to what's going on. If that is the truth, that they did offer that much and he turned it down, I am super confused about why he would do such a thing. So it kind of seems like he wants out of Minnesota, which again, I don't understand really why he would do that, just because that builds no goodwill with not only your current team, but any team that wants to take you on. Um, and just it's a confusing move all around. So I'm confused on Kaprizov's side. I'm confused on Minnesota's side, who seems like they downgraded this season, this off season, I should say. They're a team kind of stuck in neutral right now if they can't get a Kaprizov deal done. Yes, their defense is really good, and I do agree in the chat with Dark Nest that I do think they are a very high upside team, but not necessarily, but also a very high floor team. I just think there are so many question marks and so many ways for this to go wrong that the chance of them hitting their floor is way higher than the small percentage chance that they hit their ceiling. I think that the reckoning has been brewing for Minnesota for some time now, and I don't think that I see that changing anytime soon. It seems like losing a lot of their stabilizing players, like a Freddie Gaudreau, is is only maximizing their chances of messing this up. So I'm out on Minnesota. I think that they could be a very underratedly team to miss the playoffs here.
Yeah, I think a lot of good points there. So, I mean, first of all, in terms of the Kaprizov stuff, I guess just to summarize my thoughts on the matter, I think he's staying in Minnesota. I think the issue there is that they just came out like they came out ready and like I don't know hot and heavy. I guess I don't know what the right term is. They just came out so strong saying that they would pay him whatever he wants. Yeah, like if I were Kaprizov, I would turn down their first offer too, no matter what it was. You know, like if that's the hill that they're dying on is that they will do whatever it takes to keep him around. Like, why wouldn't you try to get more money out of that? So I think he probably does stay in Minnesota if I had to guess today. Maybe he can negotiate an extra million a year or something like that. But maybe Minnesota calls the bluff back on them, and he's like, okay, I do want that much money, and he does sign it. But so it's tough to say. I think he probably stays in Minnesota. I think they get it done. Um, and if he does stay and he stays healthy, I think they could do a lot of things, and they could probably make the playoffs again. But that's a big if. You also would probably need some more growth from a guy like Matt Boldy, from a guy like Brock Faber, or Bouillon, or someone else. But keep in mind they do have a great goalie, right? Philip Gustafson looks like a pretty solid guy between the pipes. So um, there are some pieces to like there. But I'm with you. I'm mostly out on this team. It just kind of, especially if they can't get this done, you got to be way out on this team. But um, yeah, I think that's probably enough Minnesota talk for now. But um, it is an interesting one to monitor for sure. Moving up the Central Division standings, we are out of the wild card and into the divisional playoff spots from the Central. Third in the Central with 102 points, the Colorado Avalanche last year. And their offseason, they didn't do a ton, right? They brought in Brent Burns, and then leaving Colorado are Jonathan Drouin, Charlie Coyle, Miles Wood, and Ryan Lindgren. But keep in mind, right, they do have Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar. But also keep in mind that I think they did a lot of work during the season last year. The Rantanen trade obviously was um, questionable, but got Martin Necas back. He's a great player. Gabriel Landeskog is getting healthy again. They were able to hold on to Brock Nelson, who they acquired in the middle of the season last year. They like sort of remade their forward depth, and reworked their goalie tandem, right? Bringing in Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood, the Wood brothers, who is a great band you should check out if you haven't yet. So, I mean, I think whereas the off season alone wasn't very exciting, I think they've got some great pieces and as I said, did a lot of their work during the season last year. So, I don't have a ton to say on Colorado other than Cale Makar is the best defenseman in the NHL and Nathan McKinnon is the second best forward in the NHL, second best player in the NHL. Um, and it's hard not to like that. So maybe the depth is a little bit questionable, but to be honest, I think it's solid enough, especially in the forward group. Maybe not in defense, but guess what? You got Cale Makar, and then their reliability, like their liability, I should say, in net is sort of has been stabilized now that they got Georgiev out of there. I think the drop off is coming for Colorado. I don't think it's this year. I think it'll be some time before that happens. While they've got this core in place, it's hard not to like what they've got. So I'm expecting them to just sort of, you know, play another great season, finish with 100 points or more and get a divisional spot. But yeah, I'll pass it on to you. What do you think of their offseason and the upcoming season for them?
Yeah, and you have to think they technically added Gabriel Landeskog back, who basically
Right.
didn't play last season and is expected to play the full season, at least so far. Another injury-prone guy, but one of the best, 25 or so skaters in the league.
Hmm.
They're a very top-heavy team. I feel like, yeah, the Colorado discussion is the same we've had for years since they won the cup. They're a very top-heavy team. Their depth is slowly whittling away. Like year after year after year, they lose a little
Hmm.
bit more depth, and it just seems to not matter. And I kind of expect it to not matter again. I expect them to finish around the same because they did lose depth, which would perhaps make their standings drop a little bit. But they also gained Gabriel Landeskog, so they're going to win some games because of him. So
Hmm.
I think I think with Colorado, they're probably going to finish around 100 points again, maybe closer to 105, and not really take a step back just because they're a well-run hockey team with a good coach and one of the best GMs in the league who's not afraid to make an all-in move. Plus, they still have another season in HS. We'll see if an extension gets done there, although it sounded like that was doubtful last season, but they've got enough, even if their depth is pretty poor. I think they have enough high end talent to where they should be able to contend for at least a playoff spot and probably a divisional spot.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And then yeah, I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, Rantanen is gone. Um, yeah, I think their top six forwards that they've got are arguably one of the best top six in the league. But beyond that, and then beyond their top pair, they do seem pretty top heavy. So
Yep.
um, yeah, I think
But they've proven for years now that that's enough to win you games in the NHL.
sure. I mean, when Nathan McKinnon is being Nathan McKinnon, when Cal McCarr is doing what he does, that'll help you a
Yeah.
lot. McKinnon had 116 points this year, 111 2 years ago, and then
Decent.
140 the year before last. He's insane. He is ridiculous.
He's all right.
So he's one of the better players in the league. I would say. I'd say he's above average. Okay,
Fair.
moving up, moving up the Central Division to the Dallas Stars, who finished second in the Central last year with 106 points. Um, I'm gonna be honest. Oh no, the Stars won the Avs Stars matchup, right?
Yeah.
Gosh, it feels like
Because Rantanen had a hat trick in game 7.
that's right, that's right. That just feels like it was so long ago. And those 2-3 matchups are
And the
lethal.
Stars have owned the Avs in the playoffs for years running now.
It's true. Um, so the story of their offseason was not a big one, but really they needed to get under the salary cap, and so they shipped a lot of names out, including Mikko Granlund, Evgeny Dadonov, Mason Marchment, Cody Ceci, and Matt Dumba. They brought in a familiar face in Radek Faksa and Vladislav Kolyan. I always mess this name up. Kolyachonok or something like that. I can never get that one right. But anyways, again, not a huge offseason. Really added a couple depth pieces, but mostly shipping some names out, as I said, to get under the cap. Um, what do you make of the Stars? I mean, they are probably when you look at the group of the best teams in the league, I think they're on the short list when it comes to what they've got and what they have, for the future. Um, so you've said on here, and you don't have to give it away quite yet if you don't want to, but you've said on here in the past that you see big things coming for them this season. So what do you like about the Stars, and is there anything that concerns you a little bit about what they've got for the upcoming season?
I think the Stars have two questions. I think their offseason was kind of a lateral move, maybe a slight step backwards, but nothing that's really going to hamper them. Their depth is just so elite. I think with the Stars, there's two questions that loom over this team: is what is the fate of Jason Robertson? Is he going to be a Dallas Star, or are they going to trade him away because they're out of cap space? And then can they finally win the Stanley Cup? To me, this is one of the premier teams in the NHL. I'll save, I guess, my season long prediction for them till the end here, but I think they're one of the best teams in the NHL. You want to talk about top end talent? They've got the aforementioned Robertson, they've got Rantanen, they've got Heiskanen, they've got Ottinger, and Wyatt Johnston, who are some of they're probably all top 50 players. Some of them even higher on that list, and they also have the depth to supplement that. They've got three elite lines in terms of relative lines. Their defensive depth is where beyond Harley and Heiskanen, I think where they are a little bit exploitable, but their forwards are such a strong unit that it almost doesn't matter for the Dallas Stars. Um, that's true. There are some questions, especially in the playoffs. I think he's a goalie who has stepped up in some big games, but not every big game. So, but to me, I think the Dallas Stars are one of, and I don't mean this in terms of who I like, but I think they're one of the favorites to win it all, as in like one of the best positioned teams to do so, not in terms of they're my favorite team, because they're not. I don't like the Dallas Stars, but I respect them because I think they're a very well run organization. They made the all in move to get Rantanen. They still have the depth to supplement it. To me, the question is, can they win the Stanley Cup? They've been one of the favorites for years now and have disappointed in the playoff year after year. They seem to beat Colorado and not much else. So there's a really big question mark looming over this team of like, can they get the job done? Because their window is wide open right now, but given their cap space, they are in probably the most precarious cap predicament of any team in the NHL, save maybe the Oilers, that they kind of have to win now. So can they get it done? I think there's all the chance in the world, but the Stanley Cup is the hardest trophy to win in professional North American sports, arguably. So there's no guarantees. I think they've done everything they could, or they've done a lot of what they could to put themselves in a position to do it. And they're rightfully one of the favorites to win it all. But yeah, the Stars are a really, really good team. Regular season, I guess postseason they have some questions, but in the regular season they're one of the best teams. I in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And yeah, like the window is wide open, but and they're definitely a popular pick, but we've been saying that for a few years now. So I think you're right in that the big question is, can they get to the finals and can they win the cup? I mean, that has to be the expectation. Like this team is too good for the expectation or the goal to be to, advance one round, advance one more round than they did last year, right? Like, and that again, that would be getting to the Stanley Cup playoffs. But I still feel like that's a loss for them if they just get to the playoffs and lose, like, or sorry, to the finals and lose. That's still not enough. Obviously, like that's if for example, if the Blues were to get to the finals and lose, I would say that's a successful season. The Stars doing that, I don't think so, because again, as you said, the cap situation is more precarious, and the window is open. But I think sometime soon it might start to close. I don't know, because they've got some exciting young players. Their future looks pretty good as well. Um, but again, there is the Jason Robertson question. Can he be a franchise player? Can he reverse the regression that we saw last year, at least to start the season? And then, yeah, as you said, the question marks seem to be beyond like their top three. Haskin and Harley and are pretty great. Lindell is okay. Beyond that, there's not a lot to like. So I don't know. I don't have a ton to add. I'm just kind of reiterating some of the stuff you said and agreeing with those points. I think you summed it up pretty great. So yeah, a lot of pressure for the Stars. I think it's cup or bust for them.
For sure.
Let's see. Now we've got one more team left to talk about before we project some central divisional standings. winning the Central Division, coming first in the Central, and also winning the President's Trophy last year. Of course, were the Winnipeg Jets with 116 points. Um, we all sort of know what happened after that. The Blues took them to 7 games, and it was a tragic end to the seventh one. But I don't want to talk about that. I just want to talk about the Jets and why they are not good. So coming into Winnipeg are Gustav Nyquist, Jonathan Taves, interestingly, and Tanner Pearson. Leaving, the big one is Nikolai Ehlers, as well as Mason Appleton and Brandon Tanev. So last year I came on here and said I think they are due for a big regression. Whenever we did Central Division previews, I was wrong. This year I feel a little more comfortable saying that, especially after winning the President's Trophy. I think it'll be tough for them to have such a good regular season last year, or have such a good regular season again, especially after losing, one of their best scorers in Nikolai Ehlers. Um, if they can make the playoffs, I think the playoff Hellebuck conversation is not so speculative anymore. I think it is like legit. I think we saw it firsthand in the first round. I think that is a huge concern for this team. There are pieces to like. Kyle Connor is good at hockey. Connor Hellebuck is a great goalie in the regular season. I don't know, Josh Morrissey. He's pretty good. He's pretty good. And then I mean, you know, excuse me. Mark Scheifele, obviously, one of the better forwards. But the interesting thing is the Jonathan Taves thing is interesting to me because I don't really like what they've got down the middle. They've got Mark Scheifele up top. He's a solid 1C. It seems like they're planning to use Taves as their 2C. And this guy hasn't played NHL hockey in such a long time, and I think it's probably more accurately a 3C if I'm being generous, but probably like a 4C right now. So they're expecting and hoping for big things out of Taves. I like their top line. I like their top defenseman. Their goalie is good in the regular season, but beyond that, I don't see a President's Trophy winning type team here again. So that's my take, and it could bite me in the butt again, like it did this past season. But what are your thoughts on the Jets?
I agree with you. I think they are due for a huge step backwards. I think that the Jets have just a lot of question marks and don't really have a lot of answers to fill them. I mean, last season they won the President's Trophy, and this statistic is far from everything, but it is a pretty good predictor of regular season performance, despite being 14th in the league in Corsi percentage at just over 50%. Just over 50% Corsi is like an okay to good playoff team. The reason they won the President's Trophy, if you ask me, was because of a winning performance from Connor Hellebuck, who was one of, if not the best, I mean, voted on to be the best player in the regular season. Whether or not that should have been the case, that's neither here nor there. But he proved that he can carry his team to the playoffs, and they ran him into the ground again. And then, I mean, we all saw what happened. For multiple games, how he got exposed. I think that the Jets are due for a huge step backwards. They probably are still a playoff team, but I think there's even a case that they're not. I think with guys like Connor and Morrissey, it's kind of hard to say that they're not going to be a playoff team entirely. Because while that does remind me of a team like Nashville, their depth is just so much better than Nashville. They have NHL caliber depth that Nashville does not. Um, but I think that like I'm saying that they bumped my mic. Sorry about that. I'm saying that they are a playoff team, but I think that they're close to not being. If Connor can't finish the full season or has a step backwards, or if Hellebuck goes from being the best goalie ever to just an average goalie. I think there are some serious questions about this Jets team. Like you said, the center depth is truly poor. I mean, you've already made the point, so I won't repeat it, but Jonathan Taves as a 2C is just not an experiment I would want my hockey team to go through. And I think the Jets are about to find out why. And even their wingers are okay. Like their first line is really good. I'm not going to make any claims there. The first line is really, really good. But behind them, you've got Gustav Nyquist, Cole Perfetti. They're okay, more middle six players than established second liners. Nino Niederreiter, Alex Iafallo, really more defensive guys playing in the third line. They are kind of like the Minnesota Wild in that they've invested so much into their defense that they just don't really, and losing one of their best offensive threats in Nikolai Ehlers, I think the Jets are primed for a huge step backwards. I think regression is going to hit this team and hit this team hard. And I think for the Blues' newest rival, they're going to be teams like between the Blues and the Jets. I think they're going to be jockeying for similar playoff spots. I think this team's like matchups are going to be so important as to playoff contention and potentially tiebreakers, because I think they're going to be vying for very similar playoff spots. I have the Jets as well. I guess we'll get there in just a second, but I have the Jets taking a huge step back from from first in the division, and I think that they have a lot of questions. Their defense is really, really good, but you can't win hockey games with just defense. You need offense, and what they have is defense and goaltending and Kyle Connor and kind of Mark Scheifele, who's
Yeah.
decent, low end 1C. I am very much questioning the Jets roster building strategy, and I could see them even potentially missing the dance this season.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I think that's all very well put. Before we get to let's see. Before we get to some of our projections for the standings, I realized I forgot to keep going with my matchup tracker. So I'll just go through and get those last four teams real quick. So apologies for that. Okay, but let's see. So they're playing Minnesota, first game of the season, October 9th in St. Louis, March 1st in Minnesota, and April 13th
Huge
in
break.
yeah, for sure. And April 13th in St. Louis, that'll be the third to last game of the season. So spread out throughout the season against Minnesota, October, March, and April. So 3 games against Minnesota, one of which at the very beginning, one of which at the very end. Next up would be the Avalanche. They're playing them 3 times. December 31st, New Year's Eve in Colorado. Mhm. April 5th in Colorado and April 7th back to back in April 7th in St. Louis. So one in December and then 2 back to back in April towards the end of the season against Colorado. Next up was Dallas. They're playing them pretty early on, October 18th. January 23rd, or sorry, the October 18th game is in St. Louis. January 23rd in Dallas. January 27th in St. Louis, and February 4th in Dallas. So one early on, and then 3 in pretty quick succession in late winter. And then last, we've got 4 games against the Jets. First, December 17th in St. Louis, January 20th in Winnipeg, March 15th in Winnipeg, and April 9th in St. Louis, 5th to last game of the season. So, as you said, they could be in a tight race for wild card or divisional spots, the two of these teams, and so a late season matchup could have some pretty significant implications. Okay, shall we give our standings projections? How do you want to do this?
Let's do it. I think we could just go from the bottom up and a brief explanation as to why.
Sounds good. So I'll start. I've got Chicago in the basement of the Central again. I think they're banking too much on progression from young players, especially when Connor Bedard doesn't look like the young star that they expected him to be so quickly. Not saying he can't get there, but I'm saying he needs some help, and I don't know that they've given him that help. I think again, you can't count on Frank Nazar and Connor Bedard and a couple other young guys to carry this team forward, especially after losing a guy like like Seth Jones during the season and stuff like that. And so I just really don't love a lot of what they've got. I don't think they did enough to make any steps, and I can see an argument for other teams to do pretty well, like pretty much every other team to do decently well in the Central. I can't see it for Chicago, so I'm putting them eighth.
I have Nashville eighth. As I said before, I
I
just
think that's
have
a hot
too many
take.
questions about this team. I think it is a hot take, but I'm going with it. I have too many questions about Nashville and versus. I'll get to Chicago if when I get to them on my ladder, which spoilers are next. Um, I with Nashville, I think their aging players are really hitting the regression very, very hard, and they're relying so much on those aging players to win hockey games. And it's so easy to keep up with 32 plus year old skaters, play with them enough to not lose your minutes on the ice against them, and then just attack their depth that is so, so frail and so, so thin and honestly not NHL caliber. I think the Nashville Predators are going to be in contention for the first overall pick and for Gavin McKenna. So I think Nashville has too many questions. Yusei Saros has been on the downtrend for a few years now, and it's pretty much just Roman Yossi and the boys out there. So I think they're going to need more than one of the best defensemen in the league to win hockey games. I think they're going to lose a lot this year. I have Nashville eighth.
I have Nashville seventh for a lot of the reasons you just said. I could see a better season coming for them than 68 points, which is what they got last year. Um, but not much better, and not better than any other team but Chicago. So not a lot to add there. Agree with all your points. And I just want to say, for all those watching live, let us know in the chat what your Central Division standings predictions or projections are, and maybe we can um, chat about a couple of those. Okay, who do you have seventh?
It's the Chicago Blackhawks, and I think with Chicago, you can expect some progression from young guys. I don't think I'm expecting Bedard and Nazar to take big steps forward, but I expect them to do better than they did, if even so slightly. I also think Chicago is building, also like Minnesota, one of the better defensive cores in the league with guys like Alex Vlasic and Levshinov should be playing. So I think they're going to get some efforts on the power play and the penalty kill, especially to make their if they deploy their guys right to um, make their special teams not suck. They'll probably still be bottom third, but if they can just not be 32nd or 31st, essentially is what they're looking for. And I think Spencer Knight is it's tough. Maybe he's about the same quality right now as UC Saros, but I'm still pretty high on Spencer Knight. I guess higher than most, and I think that their depth is NHL caliber, whereas the Predators is not. So that's why I have Chicago seventh over the Preds.
Fair enough. Looks like we probably have the same team in sixth. I've got the Minnesota Wild. I mean, a lot of the reasons we discussed when we talked about them, but I think you probably can't count on Kaprizov to be healthy. Slash, maybe you have to trade him away if either of those things are true, which I think there's a good chance, especially for the injury, discussion. I think that's a very real threat. I think beyond him, I mean, Gustafson is good. Rock Faber is good. Matt Boldy is good. Marco Rossi, I like. There are some young players. You need some projection from them. I'm not sure you can count on that entirely. I don't know. I don't like what they've got beyond Kaprizov, and I feel like they've kind of been stuck in the mushy middle for a long time, and I think that trend continues. I don't think they missed the playoffs by much necessarily, but I don't see it for them this year.
I agree. I have the Wild at 6. I think they missed the playoffs. I think Boldy and Rossi is a nice 1-2, and then you've got Kirill.
Yeah.
But outside of that, offensively, you're just not doing enough for me. And defensively, they're very good, but I think Gustafson had a good season. I also think he's a goalie. He's had bad seasons in the past.
Mhm.
And if that happens, there's just a lot of questions surrounding this roster, not to mention how I think the locker room tension I think is only going to rise with the situation of Kaprizov. I don't really like what's going on in Minnesota this season. I think they could be good down the line, especially that defense, but this season I have them missing the playoffs for the first time in a while, and I think that won't be the last season of them missing out on the dance.
All right. Okay. In fifth in the Central, and I should mention, I have every team making the playoffs from here on out in the Central. Um, I think there are. I think there are five better teams than in the Central than there are in the Pacific. Does that make sense? I think
I get what you're saying. There's going to be two wild
yeah,
cards from the Central and none from the Pacific, which
yeah.
I
I
agree
think
with.
4 and 5 in the Central are better than 4 and 5 in the Pacific, and I think it's pretty clear to me. In fifth, I've got the Winnipeg Jets. Actually, I've got them taking a pretty huge step back. Um,
Love it. Hot take.
Mostly, yeah, I think it probably is. I mean, they just won the President's Trophy and they still have Connor Hellebuck, but I I think the center the center discussion is what scares me most for them. It's the most valuable position, outside of a good goalie, and um, I really don't like what they've got. So I've got them taking a big step back, and I think they're still, they've still got Connor Hellebuck. They'll still make the playoffs. I'm calling for a bigger step back than I called for last year, which they then went on to win the President's Trophy. So um, now it has to be true because they can't do better in the standings than winning the President's Trophy. So I think yeah, that's what I've got.
This is also my playoff line, so at this point, all teams will be in the playoffs as well for me. At fifth, I have the Utah Mammoth. I think Utah is primed for a step forward into the playoff discussion. They only missed by a few points, a handful of points last season.
Mhm.
Um, and were eliminated with like I think 3 games left in the season or something for them. So they were close, and then they added one of the best young goal scorers in the league. Sure, their depth took a hit, but I think with teams like Colorado, we're seeing that if you have the top end talent, that's better than having consistent depth, even though that's not always the case. Such as I think Dallas and St. Louis kind of buck that trend a little bit, but I think Utah's done just enough to eke into the playoffs. I think that they are a playoff caliber team. I think that they have an offense that they can absolutely ride all the way to the postseason, and maybe they can make some noise in the playoffs. I'm not going to go that far yet, but I think they're the fifth best team in this division because I think they don't have a lot of question marks. I think you know what you're going to get, and what you should get is close to playoff caliber hockey. And like you said, I think the Pacific kind of stinks right now. So I think it's going to be enough for the Utah Mammoth to make it into the dance.
Nice. For some similar reasons, I've got Utah fourth in the Central. I really like their young core. I really like their forward group, and you know their top defensemen aren't too shabby either. I think they've got enough solid pieces to make it to the playoffs. I think they've got enough great pieces to jump Winnipeg and get the first wild card spot in the West. Um, yeah, I think this is like my hotter take, I guess, of the standings is Utah finishing fourth over Winnipeg. So yeah, what do you got
For fourth in the league, I have the Winnipeg Jets. I
in the
also have
league?
them taking a big step, a fourth in the division, excuse me.
Yeah,
I also have them taking a big step back. I see Winnipeg as a prime candidate for regression. I don't think they're going to fall so far just because I think it's hard for them to fall from president's level to out of the playoffs. But then again, we saw the New York Rangers do it, and I think that they're a similarly built team. So honestly, my heart wants me to say that they're under the playoff line, but I just can't do it. I think Kyle Connor is still really, really good. Connor Hellebuck, obviously. I think they have enough to win some games, and in a tough Central Division, I think they have enough to steal some divisional games too, which is why I have them finishing fourth in the division.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, in third in the Central. This means we both have your St. Louis Blues in the top three in the Central, right? None of us have said the Blues yet.
In
All
a
right,
divisional spot.
in a divisional spot. Okay, in third in the Central, I do actually have the St. Louis Blues. I really like, I really like this team. Believe it or not, I've got high hopes for the Blues. I think what you need most in a good team, the Blues have got, outside of like a generational or franchise or star player or whatever. I think Robert Thomas is sort of on the fringe of becoming that. I think maybe if he can become that this year, the sky's the limit for this team. But I think they've got a great goalie tandem. I really like their top three defensemen. And their forward group, I think, is one of the most underrated, one of the best forward groups in the league. It may not be very, very. It's not top heavy. It's pretty deep. I think long term they could use another piece at the top, but really I think they've got an excellent forward group that can really lead the way for them and take them pretty far. So I've got them finishing third in the Central, getting that divisional spot, and then matching up with a tough second spot. The two seed in the Central in the playoffs, which would be an exciting but difficult first round of the playoffs. But I think they can handle it after what they brought to Winnipeg this most recent year. Yeah, so I think the Blues finish third.
Yeah, I think third is an easy spot to put the Blues, which is why I'm not doing that. And hot
All right.
take, I have the Colorado Avalanche finishing third in the division.
Whoa. All
So
right.
here's I'll talk more on the Blues when I get to them and where they're placed in this now top two ranking. But with the Avalanche, I think that their depth is really poor. I think that there's a lot of question marks beyond their top six and even beyond their top line. Like Brock Nelson's really good, but if Landeskog is playing on the top line, as I think he will over Nichushkin, then I think that second line is okay. It's a good second line. I should say it's a good second line, but it's not unbeatably good. And then their bottom six is really bad. They're not going to be playing a ton of minutes, but it is exploitable. Also, their defense outside of Taves and McCarr, and Taves is really an offensive guy, anyways. Their defense outside of McCarr is pretty exploitable too. I think there are ways to score goals on this Colorado Avalanche team, but the biggest reason that I have the Blues finishing over the Avalanche is because of what we saw last season. The Blues, when they were clearly a worse team, kind of owned the Avalanche in the regular season. They went 2-0-1 against the Avs in their divisional games, and I think they can do something similar to that again because the way the Blues play, blocking shots and shutting down top players, depth can beat the St. Louis Blues, but top end talent is a game script that they've proven that they can win. Um, and I think that can repeat if the Blues can take the divisional games against the Avs. I think that could match up in some kind of tiebreaker and have the Blues finishing above the Avalanche in the season. So I know it's a hot take, but give me St. Louis all the way.
I love it. I love it. I would love to see that. Okay, wait. So you sort of did three and two together, right?
I mean, I haven't revealed my second team, but I can go into that now if you'd like.
Um, you kind of did though, didn't you?
Kinda.
Yeah, take it.
I haven't made my case for the Blues though. So I have the Blues
Yeah, let's hear it.
finishing second in the division. I don't have them beating the Dallas Stars out, unfortunately, but I think this is a really, really, really good regular season team. They don't have the trade that has been talked about unending now, the Matthew Kachuk piece that they would need to be perhaps the best team in the NHL, but they have every other piece that a roster could want to get them into the playoffs and to make a good push in the regular season. And not only that, but they have pockets of upside up and down the lineup on every single line. On your first line, you've got a good first line with Pavel Buchnevich, Robert Thomas, and Jimmy Snuggerud. Can Buchnevich be a 30-30 guy? I think so. And can Snuggerud prove to be even better? I also think so. But say for all of these ifs, if they hit at a 33% rate or a 50% rate, which is a pretty reasonable expectation, just listen to how many in areas of the roster are already good that could become great. On the first line, you've got Buchnevich and Snuggerud. On the second line, can Holloway repeat his season or even get better? And then does Kyrou have another step in him? That's already 4 players on the roster that are good and could become really great. On the third line, what is Nick Bjugstad? And I think we know what Pia Suter is, but then can Jake Neighbors repeat and maybe hit the 30 goal mark? I think those are possibilities. I don't think they're out of the question. There are just so many pockets of upside on this roster with a coach like Jim Montgomery at the helm. I absolutely believe that there's upside for this team to be one of the best in the regular season. You've got Jim Montgomery, who's the best regular season head coach. I don't think that's a crazy take to make. You've got Robert Thomas, who is a superstar level player, maybe not that elite tier, but is a superstar at least, as I would say a definition of that second tier of really, really good, better than star talent. You've got the star talent to supplement it with guys like Holloway, Kyrou, what we think Snuggerud could be, and Jake Neighbors to be a perennial 25 plus goal scorer at just was he 24 years old? And then you've got the depth as one of the deepest forward cores in the entire league. And notice I haven't even talked about the defense yet. I think the Blues could have one of the best offenses in the league with their depth, with 4 lines that can genuinely beat you on any given night. And I think they could have a top half defense for sure, with upside to get better. Like I said, with those pockets of talent, pockets of upside, can Colton Parayko repeat as a 16 goal scorer? Can Cam Fowler repeat as a 50-plus point defenseman? Can Philip Broberg get better? What is Logan Mailloux? There are so many pockets of upside here that even if half of them hit, or even if a third of them hit, that's still a lot for this team to work with, let alone if you start getting green lights all over the board. I mean, this team could be in contention for the first divisional spot. I think. So can this team win games? We've seen that they can win games with this roster post 4 Nations break when they really gelled together. They were playing like one of the best teams in the NHL. I expect that to repeat, and I expect it to lead to real regular season success and land them second in the division.
I love it. I love the optimism. I think that's that argument is well made. We're running pretty long here, so I'll just go ahead and give my second pick. I've got the Dallas Stars coming in second in the Central. I think they might have the most talent and the most depth, but I don't know. I think, I think there's an argument to be made that they have the most talent and the most depth. But I think they are a little bit overhyped, in my opinion. And I could be wrong. I think it's kind of a coin flip for me between these last 2 teams. But Dallas, I think there were some concerns at times last year. Jason Robertson, a big one. I can't remember which it was. It was either their 5-on-5 play took a big hit, or their power play wasn't looking good. I want to say it was 5-on-5. They were looking a little bit rough for an extended period last year, and maybe part of that was due to the Heiskanen injury. But I don't know. I think something's going to go wrong for Dallas yet again. This is kind of just a guess. I think if you want to say Dallas finishes first, I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to die on this hill. This is just the way I'm calling it. I think the Stars are great, but they have continued to be unable to get it done for long enough that I'm like maybe a little bit skeptical just for this year, but softly so, like a soft sell. But do you want to give your first last, or should I give my first,
I think it makes
last?
sense to do mine next, just because it is the Dallas Stars, and
Would you like to
just
give
to
your first or your first last, or would you like me to give my first last after you do your first?
yeah, I think you do your first last, so I do my first and give the first before you give your first.
Take it away.
All right. So my first
First.
is the Dallas Stars. And this is a hot take I have. This isn't relevant to the Blues, so it won't be in our bold predictions episode. But I actually have the Dallas Stars not only winning the division, but I have them winning the President's Trophy this season. I think there will be another President's Trophy in the Central, and I think it's going to be Dallas. I think they're just built to be one of the best regular season. I think they're built to be the best regular season team in the NHL. They have the depth, they have the star talent, they have the goaltending, they have the defense, they have everything that you look for a regular season team. And I think that they are just built to win in the regular season, and that's just that. They have a lot of questions coming into the postseason, but that's not what we're previewing. We're previewing the regular season here, and I think Dallas is the team to beat for the entire NHL, not just St. Louis.
I like
So
it.
they're my first place team.
Yeah, that's a great pick. I'm saying it's the Avs. I think they got one more big year coming. I think between McKinnon and Makar, they've got the best players in the division, and I don't think it's particularly close. Um, and I think that can take them a long way. But I think beyond them, while they might not be as deep as a team like Dallas, or while their forward group might not even be as deep as say St. Louis is, um, I think there's enough there to support that leading cast of McKinnon and Makar. I think Landeskog coming back is big, as we pointed out. I really like Marty Necas. I think he's great. Excuse me, Devon Taves is I mean not the best, but a solid partner for Cale Makar. But what I like most, maybe not most, but I think maybe second most to McKinnon and Makar being their duo at the top. I really like what they did with their goalie position last year. I think Mackenzie Blackwood, having gotten out of San Jose, is poised to become one of the better goalies in the league. I think he's in a great situation in Colorado, and I think played up to some of those standards at times last year after coming over. And I think given the chance to be there for a full season, will look really great, and will sort of help stabilize that team defensively in a way that a goalie hasn't been able to do for a long time in Colorado. So I really like that addition. I think Blackwood is really underrated as a goalie, and then I think McKinnon and Makar are still in their prime. And then, as I said, I like the supporting cast a little bit more than you might, just between Natchez, Landeskog, and then honestly, I guess Jack Drury is okay. But yeah, that's my first pick in the Central. Matt in the chat, his Central Division projections. Everyone can come on here and either hype him up or roast him, because we're gonna call him out here on the chat, or on the stream. Dallas, Colorado, Blues, Jets, Utah Wild, Nashville Blackhawks. Kind of went back and forth between city and nickname there. And then Rob was Jets, Stars, Blues, Utah, Colorado, Minnesota, Nashville, Chicago. So yeah, if anyone else has their thoughts on Central Division standings, let us know in the comments after the fact, or here as we wrap up the stream. But this has been a marathon. This is probably our longest ever episode. So thanks to everyone for sticking with us through it all. And I think we'll be back pretty soon, hopefully with some bold predictions. I think we're going to try to get that done sometime in the next couple episodes. I think that's probably like the more exciting topic we've got coming up. Outside of, I think, I'm checking the schedule now. I think before we have another episode, there will be hockey being played. Yeah, unless we talk before Saturday. I mean, their preseason games start this coming Saturday, 3 days from now. They're playing Dallas, so that'll be exciting. So we're gonna do bold predictions soon, and then we're probably gonna shift to some preseason coverage. talk about, react to some of these games being played. So we hope you'll stick with us through it all. Alec, do you have anything left to say about preseason and Central Division and anything else coming up?
Just excited for it all to happen. Let's go Blues.
Yeah, let's watch some hockey. All right, as I said, thanks for sticking with us for this long one. We will see you next time, sooner rather than later, we hope. And yeah, until then, let's go Blues.
Let's go Blues.